Hello, I'm your instructor for today, Michelangelo Maglake. I'm a registered psychometrician, and we will talk about theories of personality, Sigmund Freud, the Psychoanalytic Theory. Before we begin, let me introduce to you first Sigmund Freud, and we will talk about his life and biography. Well, Sigmund Freud was born in Freiburg, Moravia, part of the Czech Republic, in 1856. He spent most of his life, 80 years, in Vienna, Austria, and he was the eldest of eight siblings. He also studied medicine, specializing in psychiatry, and is interested in science. He abandoned his seduction theory in 1897 and replaced it with Oedipus complex. He also wrote The Interpretation of Dreams in the 1900s. He was very close to his mother and developed hostility towards his younger brother. He met Jean-Martin Charcot and learned hypnotic techniques for treating hysteria. He also held a personal relationship with Brewer and was taught about catharsis. During his midlife, he experienced crisis, and he also had relationship with Adler and Jung and was driven out of Austria by the Nazis in 1938. He then died in London in 1939 due to overdose. Well, what makes psychoanalytic theory of Sigmund Freud interesting? Well, he believed that personality is largely unconscious, hidden, and unknown. And this is also the source of the intellectual arousal. He believed in intellectual arousal. He also created the concept of sexual energy to gratify and survive, not always involving the genitals. Now let's talk about the psychoanalytic theory by Sigmund Freud. Well, according to Freud's psychoanalytic theory, personality develops through a series of stages, each characterized by a certain internal psychological conflict. He proposed the certain basic tenets of personality, in which human personality and behavior are powerfully shaped by early childhood experiences. He also believed that people are hedonistic, or they are the pleasure-seeking individuals. And the aim of psychoanalysis is to reduce tension. Well, Sigmund Freud also proposed certain dynamics of personality. He postulated the dynamic motivational principle to explain the driving forces behind people's actions. And to Freud, people are motivated to seek pleasure and to reduce tension, the unpleasant feeling, and anxiety. Well, he also proposed certain structures of personality. Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic theory of personality argues that human behavior is the result of the interactions among the three component parts of the mind: the id, the ego, and the super ego. And it is said that our visible personality is very few on the part of the ego and the super ego that will be shown on our external world. This theory, known as Freud's structural theory of personality, places great emphasis on the role of the unconscious psychological conflicts in shaping behavior and personality. Dynamic interactions among these fundamental parts of the mind are thought to progress through 5 distinct psychosexual stages of development, which will be discussed later. And over the last century, however, Freud's ideas have since been met with criticism, in part because of his singular focus on sexuality as the main driver of human personality development. He also proposed the levels of mental life, which is the conscious, the preconscious, and the unconscious, where the conscious is the mental elements in which awareness is given at any point of time and is directly available. The preconscious are the elements that are not conscious but can become conscious either quite readily or with some difficulty. And the unconscious contains all drives, urges that are beyond awareness but that nevertheless motivate most of our words, feelings, and actions. It can sometimes motivate people. Now let's talk about Freud's structural theory, the id, the ego, and the superego, or the provinces of the mind. Well, Freud divided the mind into three provinces, well, not necessarily anatomical, but theoretical. The id, the ego, and the superego. And these unfortunately Latinate terms are clunky translations of the much more simplistic and direct German ones, which translate more literally into the it, the I, and the above me or higher I. Well, the main difference exists between the id and the ego. The id is the locus of primary primitive drives. Your id is what steers you towards that car on the showroom you know you can't afford, or your eyes towards that person across the room even if you're there with your significant other. Well, cite for examples. And the id operates under the pleasure principle, meaning it has no regard for reality, constraints, or consequences. A wild sexual fantasy or dream is pure id. Well, the ego balances the drives of the id against the reality of the world. It is more organized than the id, and the ego attempts to avoid displeasure and pain. Well, patients with good control of their impulses and ability to tolerate difficult emotional challenges are said to have good ego strength. This is where Freud left the real action, where was viewing in somewhat neurological terms. He described it as critically involved in self-preservation of the organism through memory, awareness of stimuli, and making changes in the external environment to gain advantage. The ego also can delay or discharge various impulses of the id, leading to release or tension. Well, the superego is the locus of the internalized moral values, prohibitions, and ideals of the person. The superego is what compels men to climb out of foxholes under fire to pull a wounded comrade back to safety. It also is what probably drove you to attend medical school or enroll as a psychology student. Well, it is the repository of your ego ideal, your idealized self, the self you want yourself ideally to be. The superego is also where your conscience lives and is responsible for the experience of guilt. Well, ego is always caught in the middle of battles between the superego's desires for moral behavior and the id's desire for immediate gratification. Because of that, we will talk about certain dynamics of personality as proposed by Freud, and it has two parts. First, it has the drive. Well, a drive is an instinctual need that has the power of driving the behavior of an individual, an excitatory state produced by a homeostatic disturbance. Well, drive is based on the principle that organisms are born with certain psychological needs and that a negative state of tension is created when these needs are not satisfied. When a need is satisfied, drive is reduced and the organism returns to a state of homeostasis and relaxation. And according to the psychoanalytic theory, Drive tends to increase over time and operates on a feedback control system, well, like more of a thermostat. Another part of the dynamics of personality is the anxiety. Well, um, anxiety is the core of the psychoanalytic theory of affects or feelings. And from the beginning of psychoanalytic thought has been recognized as central to an understanding of mental conflict. For it is through bad feelings that conflicts are felt and known. And in the early work of Freud, in keeping with his early discharge model of mental function, he considered anxiety to be a toxic transformation of undischarged libido. This failure of discharge could either be physiological or realistic, as in coitus interruptus or other incomplete or unsatisfactory sexual practices resulting in actual neurosis or anxiety neurosis, or it could arise from repression or its failure as a symptom of the continued pressure of unacceptable desires which led to the psychoneurosis, hysterias, and obsessions. There are three types of neurosis, anxiety rather. We have the neurotic anxiety, which is caused by impulses that the ego can barely control. We have the moral anxiety, which comes from threats of punishment from the Supra Ego. And we have the realistic anxiety. It is a normal response to danger in the real world and serves to mobilize resources to protect the individual from harm. Now let's talk about defense mechanism in the psychoanalytic theory. Well, defense mechanism in psychoanalytic theory or any of a group of mental processes that enables the mind to reach compromise solutions to conflicts that it is unable to resolve. The process is usually unconscious and the compromise generally involves concealing from oneself internal drives or feelings that threaten to lower self-esteem or provoke anxiety. The concept derives from the psychoanalytic hypothesis that there are forces in the mind that oppose and battle against each other. The term was first used in Sigmund Freud's paper, The Neuropsychosis of Defense, in 1894. Well, we have reaction formation as the first part of the defense mechanism. Reaction formation is the fixation in consciousness of an idea, affect, or desire that is opposite to a feared unconscious impulse. A mother who bears an unwanted child, for example, may react to her feelings of guilt for not wanting the child by becoming extremely solicitous and overprotective to convince both the child and herself that she is a good mother. The next one is repression. Repression is the withdrawal from consciousness of an unwanted idea, affect, or desire by pushing it down or repressing it into the unconscious part of the mind or not thinking about it. Well, an example may be found in a case of hysterical amnesia in which the victim has performed or witnessed some disturbing act and then completely forgotten the act itself and the circumstances surrounding it. The next one is displacement, which is a psychological defense mechanism in which a person redirects a negative emotion from its original source to a less threatening recipient. A classic example of the defense is displaced aggression. If a person is angry but cannot direct their anger toward the source without consequences, they might take out their anger on a person or thing that poses less of a risk. The other one is a fixation. Well, a fixation is a persistent focus of the id's pleasure-seeking energies at an earlier stage of psychosexual development. For example, individuals with oral fixations may have problems with drinking, smoking, eating, or nail biting. We also have regression. Regression is a return to earlier stages of development and abandoned forms of gratification belonging to them, prompted by dangers or conflicts arising at one of the later stages. For example, a young wife might retreat to the security of her parents' home after her first quarrel with her husband. We also have projection. Well, projection is a form of defense in which unwanted feelings are displaced onto another person, where they then appear as a threat from the external world. A common form of projection occurs when an individual, threatened by his own angry feelings, accuses another of harboring hostile thoughts. Well, introjection is the opposite of projection. Projection occurs when a person projects feelings or characteristics onto another person. Introjection, however, which is common among children and parents, occurs when a person internalizes the beliefs of other people. A child might take on elements of parents' personalities or beliefs by adopting their political ideology, concept of right and wrong, or ideas about sex. When people introject, they identify with a person or object so strongly that they cannot separate that person or object from themselves. Well, we also have the sublimation. Sublimation is the diversion or deflection of instinctual drives, usually sexual ones, into non-instinctual channels. Well, in psychoanalytic theory, it holds that the energy invested in sexual impulses can be shifted to the pursuit of more acceptable and even socially valuable achievements such as artistic or scientific endeavors. Now we'll talk about certain stages of psychosexual development in the psychoanalytic theory. Well, we have the oral stage, which begin from birth to age 1. Well, most of infants' pleasure comes from the stimulation of the mouth. If a child is overfed or frustrated, well, oral traits develop. And it has oral dependent personality, which is gullible, passive, or needs a lot of attention. Well, fixations create oral aggressive adults who like to argue and exploit others. Its erogenous zone is the mouth or oral, and gratification is gained by oral stimulation or breastfeeding. The next stage is the anal stage, which starts from age 1 to the 3rd year of life. Well, attention turns to process of elimination. The child can gain approval or express aggression by letting go or holding on. The ego develops, and harsh or lenient toilet training can make a child either anal retentive, which is stubborn, stingy, orderly, and compulsively clean, or anal expulsive, which is disorderly, messy, destructive, or cruel. And the erogenous zone for the anal stage is the anus, where the pleasure is gained by being able to control feces or potty training. The next stage is the phallic stage, which is ages 3 to 6. Well, it is the awakening of sexuality. And there are certain conflicts that develop in children in this stage. We have the Oedipus conflict or the Oedipus complex, which is for the boys only, and where it is when the boy feels rivalry with his father for his mother's affection, and when a male child wants to kill his father so he can have sex with his mother. It is from the Greek tragedy Oedipus Rex by Sophocles. And we also have the Electra Conflict or Electra Complex. Well, the girl loves her father and competes with her mother. And the girl identifies with her mother more slowly because she already feels castrated, or without the thing in the middle part of the lower part of the body. Next is we have the latency stage, which is ages 6 to the stage of puberty. It is a psychosexual development which is dormant and focuses more on same-sex friendships, and play occur here, where the pleasure is gained through the same-sex peer friendship. After the latency stage, we will be having the genital stage, which is the 12 years old and puberty above. Well, the realization of full adult sexuality occurs here, where sexual urges reawaken and pleasure is gained through sexual intercourses with non-relatives. Well, there are also certain related researches in psychoanalytic theory, and one of them is the accessing of unconscious thoughts or the unconscious mental processing. According to Freud, thoughts and emotions outside of our awareness continue to exert an influence on our behaviors, even though we are unaware or the unconscious of these are underlying influences. And the unconscious can include repressed feelings, hidden memories, habits, thoughts, desires, and reactions. Memories and emotions that are too painful, embarrassing, shameful, or distressing to consciously face are stored in the enormous reservoir that makes up the unconscious mind. Well, to identify the roots of a psychological distress, Freud employed techniques such as the dream analysis and free association, which we'll discuss later. It's the sharing of seemingly random thoughts to bring the true feelings to light. We also have this inhibition and the ego. Well, inhibition in psychology is a conscious or unconscious constraint or chain or curtailment of a process or behavior, especially if impulses or desires. Inhibition serves necessary social functions, abating or preventing certain impulses from being acted on. For example, the desire to hit someone in the heat of anger, and enabling the delay of gratification from pleasurable activities. Well, conscious inhibition is a common occurrence in daily life and is present whenever two conflicting desires are experienced. For example, the desire to eat a rich dessert versus the desire to lose weight. Well, Sigmund Freud also noted a number of ego defenses. Now we'll talk about the defense mechanism, and this ego defenses he referred to through his written works, and there are a lot of defense mechanisms contributed by the different psychoanalytic analysis. And one of them is his daughter Anna Freud, who developed these ideas and elaborated on them, adding 10 of her own. And many more psychoanalysts have also added further types of ego defenses. Well, defense mechanisms are psychological strategies that are unconsciously used to protect a person from anxiety arising from unacceptable thoughts or feelings. And another part of the related researches in psychoanalytic theory is the dream analysis. It is a therapeutic technique best known for its use in psychoanalysis. And Sigmund Freud viewed dreams as the royal road to the unconscious and developed dream analysis or dream interpretation as a way of tapping into the unconscious material. Well, There are certain applications of the psychoanalytic theory. We have the free association. Well, the traditional free association is where a person in therapy is encouraged to verbalize or write all thoughts that come to mind. Free association is not a linear thought pattern. Rather, a person might produce an incoherent stream of words, such as dog, red, mother, and scoot. They may also jump randomly from one memory or emotion to another. The idea is that free association reveals associations and connections that might otherwise go uncovered. And people in therapy may then reveal repressed memories and emotion. We also have this dream analysis. Well, in psychoanalytic theory, dreams represent wish fulfillment, unconscious desires, and conflicts. Dreams contain both manifest and latent content. Well, manifest content includes information from the dream as the dreamer remembers it. The latent content represents the repressed, symbolic meaning embedded within the dream. And during dream analysis, the person in therapy shares the manifest content of the dream with the therapist. After specific symbols are pulled from the manifest content, the therapist utilizes free association to facilitate the exploration of repressed material. Cite for example. Here's a case. Lisa, a student, shares a dream with her therapist in which she is in the backseat of a moving car that has no driver. The stoplight ahead turns red, and she is unable to stop the car. Well, the therapist helps Lisa break down the manifest content into the following symbols: moving car, backseat, red light, and loss of brakes. Through the process of pre-association, Lisa shares whatever comes to mind when thinking about each symbol. The therapist interprets these associations and offers potential meanings. And then Lisa and her therapist decide that the dream represents the unconscious conflict she has felt about choosing a career. She reveals that her parents want her to study medicine, and she has not yet told them that she wants to be a writer. The therapy suggests that the runaway car is on a path to a failure she does not desire until she gets into the driver's seat. She will not be able to stop it, and this interpretation fits for Lisa, and she decides to tell her parents about her career aspiration. Such a good example of dream analysis. Well, we also have this parapraxis. Well, parapraxis is a Freudian slip of the tongue, also called parapraxis. It is an error in speech, memory, or physical action that occurs due to the interference of an unconscious subdued wish or internal train of thought. The concept is part of classical psychoanalysis. And classical examples, involves slips of the tongue, but psychoanalytic theory also embraces misreadings, mishearings, mistypings, temporary forgettings, and the mislaying and losing of objects. Now, let us analyze and evaluate the different concepts and evaluate the psychoanalytic theory itself. Well, if you would analyze the theory Sigmund Freud made, it can generate research. It is low on its openness to falsification because it's quite original. Since he's the father of psychology, most of the concepts in psychology came from him. Although it is very loose in organizational framework, and it's not a good guide to solve practical problems in life as well. Well, it is also low in internal consistency, and most of the psychoanalytic theories, concepts in these theories are very difficult to test. Well, according to the theory itself, the applicable concepts of humanity in this theory is that this theory is deterministic. It determines a lot of things in life, in personality. But it is also pessimistic. It does not view life in the positive way. It view life in a more of a negative side. It is also more on causality over teleology. What is the cause rather than the result? And then it is more on the study of the unconscious over the conscious mind. And it's more on nature over nurture. Biology, the physiological processes, and over the culture, over the environmental influences that builds up personality. Though it provides equal emphasis on uniqueness and similarity as well. So I think that would be how would we evaluate the psychoanalytic theory. Well, I think that wraps up the things that you need to know and understand in the psychoanalytic theory of Sigmund Freud. We will further discuss other topics about Sigmund Freud's methods in psychoanalytic theory and later on the future slides. Well, thank you for watching, and I hope you would subscribe for more lecture video presentations. Thank you everyone, and God bless.